I've interviewed over 1,000 rideshare drivers and learned a lot about the pros, the cons, the good, the bad, and the ugly in numerous different ways when it comes to driving for Uber and Lyft. So in this video, I'm talking about the 7 biggest things I learned when interviewing over 1,000 drivers. Number 1, it's getting worse. I used to drive for Lyft and Uber years ago. I don't anymore, which is why I interviewed so many drivers in so many different locations. And in case you didn't know, your location is the number one factor that determines how much money you can make. I've talked to male and female drivers. I've talked to drivers who primarily just do Uber, just do Lyft, do a combination. I've tried to mix up the demographics. And the biggest thing I've learned from a lot of drivers just all over the place, and regardless of age, of gender, sexual orientation, of location, of driving style, there's one common thread. Whether you like Lyft and Uber or not, and I do want to say that because there's a lot of drivers who do like it. I'll talk about that in a second. But basically, things are getting worse. Now, when I first started driving, which was back in 2014, I made good money. I made about, looking back in the day, I'd say on average, because I did do a lot of different things to optimize my revenue, about $25 an hour, flexible schedule, all the benefits of Lyft and Uber, and it was great. There really wasn't a lot of this negativity you hear and read about when it comes to Lyft and Uber. Now, years later, things are completely different. Almost every driver I talked to when I interviewed, when talking about the good and the bad about Lyft and Uber and everything, said, look, I'm not gonna lie, it's just not what it used to be. I hear that a lot, especially from the older drivers, and I see this too. Even though I don't drive anymore, I see the trajectory and the path that it's going, and the path just seems pretty downhill. And I hate to be negative. I don't want to make this, I've said this before in other videos, I don't like making and talking about things in a very pessimistic way, just to make it very clickbaity, where I'm like, oh my God, you never believe what Uber and Lyft's doing. But like, when I meta-analyze everything, I've talked about this in so many other videos, a lot of them tend to be negative, and I don't like to be negative, but I kind of have to be because I have to reflect the reality of what's going on with ride sharing. From everything when it comes to Uber and Lyft taking out more money than ever before. When I first started driving, it was 20%. Now it's a lot more, depending upon the area, which is kind of weird. I got a comment recently of someone saying that I think it was their husband was a CPA, and on average, Lyft took out 70% of the driver's earnings. That's insane. Drivers are also making less. So not only is Uber and Lyft taking out more, drivers are making less per hour. And then you factor that in with, say, things like inflation. It's more expensive now for oil changes, maintenance on your car. I will say gas, at least at the exact moment of this video, seems a bit lower, which is great. But massive knock on wood there, because you never know what's going to happen when it comes to gas prices, right? But then there's so many things going on. In addition, I just did a video about should you drive for Lyft and Uber in 2024. The biggest issue and the biggest point on that video, making it very relevant during the time of that video, is too many drivers being on the road. There's a lot of drivers There's more drivers now than ever before. So with all these things coming into play, you have these kind of 4 main factors, at least I consider them 4 main factors, and they're all pointing downhill. Even if you do like driving for Lyft and Uber, and I've talked to a lot of drivers who do, which is something I will talk about, a lot of them still say, yeah, I do like it for X, Y, and Z for a bunch of reasons, but it's still not what it used to be, or it's getting worse, or I'm considering quitting even though I like it, or it's not becoming worth it anymore. And it is unfortunate here. There are a lot of amazing parts about being a driver. That's something I'm going to talk about actually in the next point. Point number 2, there are a lot of amazing parts of being a driver. There's no question there. I have no affiliation with Uber and Lyft. I might as well stress that. I just call the ball as it lies. And unfortunately, the ball is lying in a very dark end of the court right now, to use that analogy. And it's just not looking good. Now, will things get better? It is tough to say, right? That's pure speculation. I think there's a lot of law and legislation being put forward, a lot of big things happening, whether it's in California or New York, what I've talked about recently. So there are certain moves, if I'd call it that might improve things for rideshare drivers in the future. But even still, when interviewing a lot of drivers for numerous different factors that I will talk about more and more in this video in depth, but certain things like deactivations is a massive issue. Passengers complaining, you getting BS rides, the bonuses being less than before, just the hourly pay being lower, issues with insurance and stuff like that, taxes being a bit more tricky than before. There's so many different factors, I hate to say it, that's working against a lot of drivers. And this is something I'm hearing a lot, especially when interviewing a lot of drivers in numerous different ways, some in person, some online, some through just texting. I interviewed, like I said, well over 1,000 in numerous different areas and everything. And it stinks to say, because I think like I said, there are a lot of benefits to being a rideshare driver. But the number one common theme among anything, whether you love Lyft and Uber, whether you hate them or you're in the middle, the most common thread, I'd say the biggest common thread by far with almost every interview was, look, ride sharing, it's just getting worse. Number 2, most drivers like it. Now, I know this is a shock. You may think I'm making this up, and I know I'm ready for the comments, because if you look at a lot of my videos, 90% of those comments on a lot of my videos are negative. Not necessarily towards me, although sometimes there are, that's the nature of YouTube, but most of them are just saying, look, I hate Lyft and Uber, they did this. I do think, I look at it, it's called like the Yelp paradox, so to speak, where if, let's say you check out a nightclub, for example, on Yelp, most of the time the reviews are negative. But if you go to a nightclub, I'm making that up, or a restaurant, and you have a really, really good time, you're probably going to give a review. If it's a mid-range, you probably won't give a review. But if it's bad, you go to Yelp, right? Likewise, I do think that that's a bit skewed. If you look at a lot of my videos and read the comments, and I've had almost like commentception. I have had some people say, hey, Mark, I've been reading all these comments, and I see all these people being like, oh, Lyft and Uber, no. I feel like I'm not going to drive anymore after reading all these comments. And here's the truth. After interviewing an absurd amount of drivers and talking to a lot, I realized most drivers actually do like Lyft and Uber. Is Lyft and Uber perfect? No. Do they do a lot of messed up stuff? Yes. Do they screw over their drivers a lot? Absolutely. There's no question that. Remember, two things can be true at the same time. This is where kind of being self-aware of the cognitive dissonance is important, that you can still love Lyft and Uber, and you can still love working for them, and you can still enjoy the aspect of ride sharing while also acknowledging they do a lot of messed up stuff and they treat their drivers horribly. Absolutely no question there. And I want to bring this up because there are a lot of benefits to Lyft and Uber, and I think the biggest that I've noticed among all of them, not going to be any surprise here, Captain Obvious, the flexible schedule. I think that's the biggest thing. I will say I have noticed that drivers who drive part-time tend to like it more than drivers who drive full-time. That is a big thing I've noticed via meta-analysis through all my interviews, but that's not always true, though. I want to say that I do notice, I think and I've said this before in other videos, if you drive part-time, you don't have to deal with as much of the bad stuff because you're driving part-time. A second thing, which is big, is you don't have to rely on it. If you're working a horrible job and you have to rely on that income, that job, it gets immediately worse. I experienced this when I was an accountant, right? If you think Lyft and Uber is bad, try working at the big four accounting firms. I want to say that as a side note. But when it comes to, Lyft and Uber, right? Like, if you drive part-time, you have a 9-to-5 job that can supplement your life. That 9-to-5 job pays for your bills, some spending money, cash to put away for savings, it pays for your vacation. Then if you drive for Lyft and Uber on the side, it's more of extra cash, right? So you're not as hard on the numbers, where if you don't make that much money, you're not as worried. If you're driving full-time, it gets to be a big worry. However, I will say, I have talked to a lot of full-time drivers who love it. Say, look, when I was doing it part-time, and I will say, I always suggest start off part-time and then full-time. Have to suggest that. But I've talked to a lot of full-time drivers who were like, yeah, I started out part-time, I switched to full-time. I was supposed to be driving part-time, or I did it here and there between my schedule. Now I don't have a boss at all. When you drive full-time, although there are a lot of negative benefits that get amplified because you're driving full-time, there's one huge positive benefit, or actually, a lot of them, but the biggest positive one is now you're truly fully flexible. You don't have a boss. You don't have someone screaming down your throat. Yes, there are pros and cons to working for yourself, and if you're like, driving Lyft and Uber is the closest thing to working for yourself than actually owning your own business, like, it's pretty close, to be honest. But at the end of the day, I talk to a lot of drivers who drive full-time who are like, yeah, I can drive how I want, when I want, during the week. I can start my week off. If I want to drive hard on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and take the rest of the week off, I can do that. If I want to drive hard and I only do the weekends, each weekend, each month, I could do that and have the week off. You can completely mix it up how you want. And at the end of the day, the flexible schedule and making a good amount of money too. I mean, if you remember, I've said this before in other videos, in terms of the benefits, I look at the main benefits as one, of course, the flexible schedule. 2, instant cash outs. You hit a button and that money is instantly in your account. 3, low barrier to entry. You don't need a college degree. You don't need a certificate. You just need a driver's license, which most people have. And lastly, 4, it's an unlimited amount of hours, right? You could drive as much as you want. I mean, there is a slight low-key cap where you can't drive more than 12 hours in a day in most places, just for safety, because if you're driving a lot, you don't want to get too, like, highway hypnosis, as referred to, or get too low daisy or drowsy. Remember, I'm a huge advocate of not driving when tired, right? But for the most part, you have an uncapped amount of hours. And a lot of jobs, that's not the case. A lot of jobs, they're like, sorry, we can't book you anymore. we have enough hours for everyone on the table, right? So there's a lot of benefits to driving for Lyft and Uber. And when I talk to a lot of drivers, they do like actually driving, and they like I think what I've realized, and I saw a comment about this, to put it well, is a lot of drivers like ride sharing. They don't like Lyft and Uber. And I think that is the best way to overarch this entire concept. A lot of drivers do like ride sharing. They like the concept of ride sharing. They like the work itself. I've done a video about this, I think it was a couple years ago, that something about it's all the addictive. That is kind of fun. You go out, you're meeting new people. Like, I love the social aspect of Lyft and Uber. I love the fact that I can turn on the app and instantly start making money. Most drivers, I'd say, it's tough to give me an exact amount. I'd say about 75% of drivers that I talked to did love Lyft and Uber and everything that's going on with it. But the company logistics is where it gets a little tricky, right? And that's where it gets tough. I think a lot of drivers do like the concept of Lyft and Uber and the concept of ride sharing, but don't like Lyft and Uber itself as business entities with the way they conduct their practices, being more specific, the way they treat their drivers. But I gotta say, especially interviewing a lot of drivers, and maybe a bit counterintuitive to a lot of people on this channel who read all the comments, you may think every driver hates Lyft and Uber. No, most of them love it. Most of them really like it. They do really like ride sharing and all the logistics and all the benefits, but the way Uber and Lyft treats their drivers, the way they go about certain things, most drivers do not like. Number 3, strategies. To sum it up, all I'm talking about is bonuses and incentives. When I've interviewed a lot of drivers, obviously I've talked about different things. Do you like it or not? Like I just talked about. What's the pay like? Do you like the people? How is it just driving in the area that you're in? And when I talk to drivers about optimization, when I say, okay, like how much money do you make? What do you think in your given area is the big determining factor between a driver who makes a lot of money and a little? The biggest thing here, over and over again, is bonuses. The biggest spread, and I have to think about this, I believe it was in Denver, Colorado, of any city I've ever interviewed, when it comes to drivers there, was anywhere between 20 to 25 an hour to then 40 to 45 an hour. You're looking at almost double the income when it comes to Denver when I interviewed a ton of drivers there. And when I asked them, okay, what's the difference though? Biggest word, bonuses, right? Now this is a big thing. It does fluctuate. I gotta be honest that when it comes to Lyft and Uber, this is why I suggest, by the way, sign up with both apps. If you don't do that, you're missing out. When one app has a bonus that weekend, you're not gonna get that if you don't sign up with both. 100% sign up with both. But it is interesting how, when interviewing so many drivers about now income optimization, the number one word I heard was bonuses, bonuses, bonuses. Incentives. I've heard a lot of drivers tell me, oh, I have this cool little hack, and this is what I do. I have this cool strategy that I do on this time. I do this and this with Lyft and Uber. They have all these kind of like Uber and Lyft hacks is the only way I can really word it to optimize the amount of money they were making when it comes to their bonuses. A subject of this, what I noticed when I talked to and interviewed over 1,000 drivers about their income, is the drivers who made a good amount of money, I noticed, drove very specifically. They didn't just be like, oh, I'm going to drive today. They particularly look at the bonus structures, the incentives, the peak hour times in their area. They look at surge pockets. They were almost like, I don't know, like strategists in a chess match, like a Magnus Carlsen type figure, looking at everything, plotting before they went and drove. I noticed the drivers who didn't like how much Uber and Lyft paid, and obviously I would say as a meta-analysis, like I said, a lot of drivers don't like the way things are going, but to look at things more specifically, the drivers who didn't make that much money and who hated the pay more, when asked, oh, so how do you drive? What's your strategy? They'd be like, what do you mean strategy? I turn the app, I drive. So they didn't really go into it thinking methodically and whatnot. I'm not saying you have to do one or not, but I'm saying that one unique trend I've noticed is the drivers who make a good amount of money who like to pay were very, very strategic about when and how they drove. And this is dependent area to area. That's why I said, for interviewing a lot of drivers, some drivers had completely opposite strategies than another city, but it still worked given that city's logistics, layout, the culture, et cetera, et cetera. One example I'd say is in Boston. When I used to drive in Boston, during the summer in Boston, not good to drive, in my opinion. During the winter, basically when a lot of college kids are there, it's best because one, take the winter. One, if like say you go outside, you want to take the T usually breaks down. That's the public transportation in Boston. Because of the snow, it always breaks down. So when people need to get to work, boom, that's when you come in. It's cold. People don't want to be outside. People don't want to walk. A lot of times it's cold and rainy. A lot of girls, like say, don't want to walk in high heels, for example, right? In addition, when it comes to winter, a lot of college kids are there. And as you can imagine, they want to go out, they want to party. So during those times, it's a great time to drive. The worse the weather is, the more money you're going to make. If anything, I've talked to a lot of drivers, like say here in LA, where it's the opposite for optimization. During the summer, it's a good time to drive because people are like, hey, it's the summer, it's a beautiful day, let's go out, let's go to the beach and not pay for parking, which is a great advantage of Lyft and Uber. Let's go out, let's have a fun day. So I've talked to some drivers here in LA who actually prefer the summer. Boston, complete opposite, right? So it does depend area to area, like I said at the beginning, like I said in a lot of videos. But it is interesting, I gotta say, and this way I suggest to a lot of drivers that before you just go out and drive, or let's say you've been driving for a while, take a second and maybe look at statistics, maybe create a spreadsheet, which is what I did. I know that's a very accounting-like thing to do, but it is interesting, because even in the same area, it's crazy, especially in a place like Denver is a good example, here in LA a little bit as well, that there could be such a drastic average hourly rate that drivers will tell me. And that's what's super, super unique. And the one underlying foundation of all this kind of uniqueness in terms of the incomes and perspectives of pay is the bonuses and incentives. That some drivers will look at it like a chess game and they're planning 30 moves ahead, when they're going to drive, how they're going to drive, and they optimize their income and they do great. And they make really good money. I've heard of some drivers in Denver telling me they make between 40 and 50 an hour. My brother being one of them, actually, right? Which is really interesting here. On the other end, though, the drivers who just kind of drive aimlessly, and I hate to say it, just like to be honest, I'm very transparent in my videos of what I've learned after interviewing all these drivers, that when I talk to drivers who, even when I bring up the word strategy, they're just like, or I bring up the word bonus, like, oh, what about the bonus with Lyft and Uber? They're like, oh, yeah, I don't really check that. And I'm like, you're literally leaving money on the table, and those drivers are the ones that tend to hate the pay. The biggest thing to make the most amount of money that I've seen, focus on the bonuses. Number 4, renting. Gotta be honest, this is one I did not expect personally. Some of these I did expect. I've read a ton of articles about Lyft and Uber. I've done a bunch of videos, of course, about Lyft and Uber. I read the comments, a lot of these I did kind of expect or had some idea, maybe not concretely 100%, but I had a rough idea that, yeah, this makes sense. Some of these you might not expect. Like I said, that most drivers do like driving for Lyft and Uber, especially, like I said, if you look at the comments. This is one, though, I personally did not expect. When it comes to renting, my take on it has usually been negative, to be honest, right? In the sense that, like, say, it costs between $200 and $300 a week. You have to drive just to break even, right? And if you think about it, let's say you make $20 an hour. You're like, oh, I make $20 an hour. Not bad, right? Well, you could debate that, I guess, depending upon the area. Let's say on average you make $20 an hour. You have to drive 10 hours in that week just to break even. Anything past that's profit. And in your mind, you're like, hey, I broke even. Now I'm going to make $20 an hour. But not really, because if you think about it, if you do the overall meta-analysis, you still have to spend $200 in that week. So you're not necessarily making $20 an hour. It's usually a little bit less than that because you have to factor in the cost of the rental. But when interviewing a lot of drivers, when talking to the ones who rented a vehicle, they loved it. Most of them loved it. And that shocked me. I'll be honest. That actually genuinely shocked me. I did not believe that because I feel like there's two sets of drivers. I can't think if there would be a third set, but I think you have two categories of drivers. Drivers who are like, I don't have a car, I rent one. Drivers who have their own car and still decide to rent one. I don't think there's a third category. Can't think of like another situation, but anyway, right? So you either rent a car because you kind of have to, I'd say, or you rent a car because you want to. Now, if you have to, I feel like that makes more sense. You're like, okay, I don't have a vehicle. I know some people have said, yeah, my credit's bad. I have bad credit. I can't get a loan. I can't get a lease. I'm going to rent one because it's a lot easier to get that rental, given my credit score and all these financial logistics. You can start driving. Yeah, you have to put in those hours. I'd say most drivers I talk to, like 90-95%, who rent a car do drive full-time as well. I have to think about this. I don't even know if I've ever talked to a driver, now I think about it, who drives part-time and rents a car. I don't know, actually. So it might be close to 100% now you think about it. I'd have to think about that in depth. But most drive full-time. And the idea is it's uncapped, right, in a sense. You could drive an uncapped amount of hours minus, like, the limit for safety in terms of the 12 hours per day. But I think most drivers are going to be driving usually less than that for most of the time. But if you think about it, in a day, if, like, say, you really hit it hard, you could get that break-even point within a day. Then the entire rest of the week, you're completely good to go, right? And if, let's say, you can't really obtain a vehicle, the ability to get a vehicle, that, yeah, maybe you have to work 10 hours in order to break even in that week. But the fact that now you have a tool, if I'd call it that, to go out and make an unlimited amount of money, in a sense. I know the word unlimited might get some hate, but if you think about it, you could drive as much as you want, how you want, when you want, completely flexible. And in a sense, if you want to go 12 hours each day and go all out, you can do that. And so I think for a lot of drivers who start driving with the rental vehicle, they look at it as like, hey, this allows me to make an absurd amount of money. I know some drivers who say, hey, you know what? I rented a vehicle. I talked to one driver recently who they want to see how much money they can make in a month if they drove every single day. They made, I think it was about, give or take, they didn't say an exact like dollar figure in terms of the exact amount, but they said roughly about 12K. I'm like, that's pretty ridiculous that they made 12K in 1 month. And they said, look, that's all they did. Every day they drove for about 12 hours every day. That is crazy to me. I don't know how they did it. I don't know how they didn't go insane. I gotta be honest. But that is crazy. Let's say you're like, oh my God, I'm 10K in debt for student loans, for a credit card, for whatever. It's time to hustle. And that tool that you can get to rent a vehicle, I think that's the biggest thing is that for a lot of people, they're like, okay, I need a car to get a job. I need a job to get a car, that kind of job car paradox. How do I go out and start making more money? My job's only giving me 10 hours a week. There's all these different unknowns when it comes to a lot of jobs. And I think for a lot of people, and this is what I've learned interviewing so many drivers who rent, they're like, hey, I can't get a car. I can't get this. I can't get this. Going into my job's tricky. I don't have a lot of hours. It's kind of tough. And I have to listen to a boss screaming down my neck and screaming down my throat. But if I get this rental vehicle, yeah, I'm going to have to shell out $200 initially, or $250 or $300 for that week. But that allows me to now make an absurd amount of money on my own dime, and I can do it how I want. And I think that's why I've noticed, that's my thing is the freedom. You know, I think that's the biggest thing, or the biggest benefit of Lyft and Uber is the freedom. And if you have a car, I'm not saying you're already a bit of a leg up, but I feel like to most people, if you have a car, that gives you, of course, a ton of freedom. And if you don't have a car, you feel that lack of freedom. So maybe getting that rental gives you a bigger sense of freedom, both transportation-wise, but also driving for Lyft and Uber, right? So I think that's the first thing I'm going to say as when it comes to renting. The second thing that I noticed is there were more drivers than I expected who have their own vehicle, who rent a car. Now, the first time I heard about this was actually one of my girlfriends years ago, back in Boston. This is 2016, if my memory is correctly. She was like, look, it was at the time, it's back 2016, it was $200 a week to rent a car through Uber, flat $200. She goes, hey, I drive pretty much full-time or mostly full-time. Why put all that wear and tear on my car when I can drive this car into the ground if I want to, and I just pocket it? And I remember thinking like, I get what you're saying. It's $800 a month for the car. I kind of get it, kind of don't, to be honest. But it worked for her, and she absolutely loved doing that. In addition, this doesn't exist anymore. Do like a moment of silence. But back in the day, Lyft Express Drive had a rule that the more you drove, the less money you had to spend on that rental. And I believe it was 63, or if you drove 63 rides or more in a week, that rental vehicle was free. Lyft stopped doing that for obvious reasons. I think they lost money. But I remember back in the day, I'm like, now that is a steal, right? Because if you're going to do full-time, you're easily going to hit 63 rides in a week. Easy, that's about 30-ish hours of driving, I'll say. Great option. So when it comes to people owning their own vehicle, another thing I didn't expect is a lot of people who rent a vehicle actually love it. And again, this still shocks me. I was trying to wrap my mind around this when I heard this like over and over and over again. And like I said, the two things I could think of is one, the freedom. The big thing is the freedom for a lot of people that if you don't have a car and you could start having a car and start making money how you want, when you want, with almost an unlimited cap in a sense, I could see the happiness jump, if I'd call it that, when it comes to renting a vehicle. On other people, the second thing, if you own a vehicle, is like, hey, you're not putting that wear and tear and depreciation on your car. If you're driving full time, you know, I can see that. I can personally see that. For me, I only ever use my own vehicle. I never rented one, but I guess I can see that. And the third thing, which is another interesting one that I noticed with a lot of drivers when interviewing them, is Teslas specifically. I had a lot of drivers tell me, like, look, I have my own car, but by me driving a Tesla, I think last driver I interviewed, he spent about $300-ish a week. So he said about $1,200 a month. And he's like, look, man, it's awesome. I have my own vehicle. The second I start driving this Tesla, I'm making way more money now. People are tipping more. They like the Tesla. Granted, this is in Los Angeles. I remember when I interviewed this driver in person. I feel like LA is a very, like, environmentally friendly, forward conscientious type area. So I could see people in LA liking a Tesla more than another place, just being honest. But it was pretty interesting that he was saying, look, I rented a Tesla specifically for the Tesla because I make so much more money driving a Tesla than my own vehicle. It's worth it to me, mathematically, to spend that $300 a week because I'm going to make significantly more than if I didn't spend that and use my own vehicle. So it's actually, for him, was more mathematically feasible at the end of the bottom line, where even though he had to spend $1,200 a month, he would make way more money just for the fact that he had a Tesla. I've done a couple of videos about should you rent a Tesla or should you drive a Tesla, or I reviewed one article, like this is maybe a year or 2 years ago, about one lady who said that she was making way more money from the fact that she switched from, I think, her Honda Civic, I think it was, to her Tesla, and how she was making significantly more money, I think almost double. So the third aspect of renting, which again shocked me, that a lot of people rent love, is specifically targeting a vehicle like a Tesla. I think that's the most cliche one, because I feel like a Tesla is just on the line of being not a normal car, I mean, it's an electric car, but I feel like if you look at like a Mercedes, that's a huge leap to like rent a Mercedes. But a Tesla, I think a bit more feasible to a lot of people, especially given how popular they're getting and everything. This also brings up more premium options, which is something I'm going to talk about a bit later in this video. But I gotta say, I have had drivers, like I said, in those three different categories. One, who didn't have a car, who rented. Two, have their own car and rent just for the wear and tear. And then three, who have their own car, but specifically rent a Tesla because they make more money. I'm in shock to say that I was very surprised that almost most, I'd say, I might even say 80 or 90% of drivers who I talked to who rent a vehicle loved it. They love the rental option. For me, was always negative towards it until I actually really interviewed a lot of drivers. A lot of drivers, it seemed like for them it was a bit of a saving grace in a lot of ways, which I'm spending so much time on this point on this video. That one shocked me. Probably the biggest one out of this entire video, that so many drivers love renting. Number 5, all it takes is one. Now, in the previous one, very positive. This one, exact opposite. Unbelievably negative. After interviewing so many drivers, I'd say it was hard to find a driver, unless they just started driving, unless they only drove for a week. It was hard to find a driver who at least didn't have a complaint about Lyft and Uber. That makes sense. But even more than that, it was hard to find a driver who at least didn't have one, what I like to call, horror story, where somebody was in their car, and this happens all the time. I'm using this as an example. Someone's in the car, they're drunk, they want to get revenge on their Lyft and Uber driver for some reason, and they say their Lyft and Uber driver was drunk, or they make something up, or whatever. This is why I suggest to a lot of drivers, get a dash cam, not just any dash cam, but a two-way dash cam. If you go on like Amazon, you could type in like rideshare dash cam that record both the outside of your vehicle in case you get into an accident, and you never know, right? Have that footage as evidence, but also the inside of your vehicle in case a dispute happens with the passenger. I think Uber also allows you to record audio too, and it's encrypted, and it only becomes unencrypted if you need to use it for like a legal case or a deactivation case or whatever, right? But anyway, just have some type of thing recording you just in case, right? And the reason why is because I've talked to so many drivers, it was hard to find. Again, most of them at least had at least one horror story. I remember my cousin even told me this, that you get one bad passenger and now that's all you're thinking about. I remember my cousin, as a quick side note, a little fun fact, I've said this before, he's the one who got me to be a Lyft driver. He's the one who convinced me to be like, hey man, I think this is perfect for you. At the time, I was hustling on music and YouTube. He's like, it's perfect for you. And he told me, he goes, I got one horrific passenger, and every single time I got a passenger after that, in the back of my head I was thinking, is this going to be another bad one, right? In addition, take things like deactivation. Next, say that story, like I said, where someone pretends that you're drunk because they want to get revenge on you, and Lyft and Uber says, okay. And it's tough who's right or who's wrong. From Lyft and Uber's perspective, they're like, whoa, I mean, if they're drunk, they can't drive. And there's been a lot of incidents, don't get me wrong, of Uber and Lyft drivers driving drunk. So they're not wrong, but what they do is they say, okay, you know what? We're going to deactivate your account. No work for a week. We're going to investigate you. And then a week goes by, and they're like, we're sorry. This person, they made it up, or we investigated it. They didn't really have a cause for their claim. We're going to put you back on the road. And you're like, okay, great, but I missed out on a week's worth of work, one. And two, now you're worried every single time you're driving, when am I going to get deactivated again? Like, so there's a legal issue that happens, and you're caught in some legal case you didn't expect. I find for a lot of drivers, almost every single one that I've had, like, let's say if you, I'm taking an entry job, take working at In-N-Out. I've used that example because In-N-Out workers get paid a lot. In-N-Out's a fast food chain. If you haven't had it yet, you got to have it. To quote Tom Segura, get your life together. If you've not had In-N-Out, it's amazing. But I feel like the worst thing that happens at In-N-Out, unless, again, some crazily dramatic situation, is what, someone complains about their burger, right? It's like the worst. But it doesn't really reflect you. They're just, whatever. If Lyft and Uber, if something goes wrong in that car, it can be detrimental to you, to your income, your reputation, your legal status, your whatever. And it's very kind of, I don't use the word scary because, again, I'm not trying to scare anybody, but I like to be transparent. But it was really interesting interviewing all these drivers that almost every single one said, look, I have this one situation, now I'm always worried about it. I got deactivated once. Now I'm always thinking, are they going to deactivate me again where I'm going to miss out on all this work? I got in this legal issue once. I got in this altercation with Lyft and Uber that I got into an accident. Lyft and Uber should have covered me, but they didn't. They kind of screwed me over. Now I'm always worried if I get into another accident, will Lyft and Uber be there for me? And at the end of the day, and this is kind of unfortunate even more so, that Uber and Lyft tends to favor their passengers more than their drivers. I think there is some, being honest, some understandable truth to this. And here's the only reason why, hear me out, is if I'm a bad driver, and there's bad drivers out there, if I'm a bad driver and I go out and drive, I can pick up 10, 20, 30, 40 people in a day, right? I'm picking up tons and tons of people. I have the ability to cause worse, more harm than one passenger, like say, gets a Lyft and Uber. And I think that's why Lyft and Uber, when they don't know which way to go, they're like, okay, well, this driver is going to keep working and keep taking Lyft and Ubers. Most people only take a few Lyft and Ubers per week. I don't know what the exact statistic is, but I think for most people, it's like they go out to the bar on a Friday night, they come back. So 2 to 4 Lyfts and Ubers on the weekends. When it comes to drivers, they're driving sometimes nonstop. So I kind of get, even though I don't agree, I do understand maybe Lyft and Uber's perspective. They're like, okay, we're going to favor the passenger more than the driver. But even still, this is a huge issue that I know it's slowly getting better. I will say that, to give credit where credit's due. I did do a video. Uber's now cracking down on kind of messed up, if I'd call it that, claims from some passengers where, let's say if a passenger doesn't really give a lot of basis for their claim, rates their driver 1 star, that 1 star does not affect your overall rating, that they kind of nullify or kind of get rid of that claim. So there is being work done on this, but I think it's just kind of unfortunate that so many drivers that I've talked to, almost every single one, had at least one horror story that I don't want to use the word permanently, but in a sense, both maybe mentally, more of anything, permanently kind of affected them, where now every time they go out and drive, they're worried about this one situation, multiple situation, whatever it is, happening again. Number 6, driving anytime. This is one that when I first heard about it, years ago actually, is when I first heard about it, did shock me. This is one I did not expect whatsoever. Now, typically when you go out and drive, the main Uber and Lyft one-on-one advice you're gonna hear is drive during the peak hours. Morning and evening commutes. Friday, Saturday nights. Peak hours. I'd say if anything, the biggest one is Friday and Saturday nights, which I feel like now, in this day and age, getting less and less frequent. I've talked about this in other videos, that because of so many drivers being on the road, a lot of drivers do try to drive on Friday and Saturday nights, and as a result of that, it almost becomes this paradox where actually you're better off driving in the non-peak hour. But anyway, going back to this point, I was shocked when I learned about this years ago. Luckily, I knew about this when I started interviewing drivers, so it wasn't as a shock to me now. And that is that drivers have very different opinions on when their favorite time to drive is, depending on maybe their sleep cycle more than anything, or their circadian rhythm, how they like driving, the type of clientele they get, and that for the most part, you can make money in almost any amount of time. I've talked to some drivers who say, look, my favorite time to drive is, like, say, from 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. That way, I get the morning commutes, maybe some people during lunch, but it's maybe a little bit quiet, and then maybe I get a few people in the afternoon, that's it. 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. I talked to other drivers like, no, I'm telling you. 4 p.m. to 10 p.m. is the best because you're getting the evening commutes. And then let's say if people are going out that night, boom, you get some nighttime rides. I don't have to deal with drunk people because you're on 10 p.m. Hopefully people aren't too drunk by that point. I like to call it the pregame hours, right? So excellent time to drive. And then you get other drivers who say, no. 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. Telling you the best time to drive because from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m., or let's say 3 a.m., let's say 10 p.m. to 3 a.m., for example, you're getting those after bar rides. You're getting people in the peak of a Friday and Saturday night going out drinking. And then I have other drivers say, no. 3 a.m. to 7 a.m. is the best because you're getting those airport rides. You're getting those super, super early rides. People going to the airport. And in my specific city, my specific area, those airport rides pay bank. And if you notice, that's a whole 24-hour cycle. And I first learned about this years ago. I think this was back in 2016, if I remember correctly, when I first talked to a driver who said, yeah, I drive at 4 a.m. to 10 a.m. That was his favorite time. And I was like, wait, what? 4 a.m. to 10 a.m.? Are there even people on the road? Are there even people ordering Lyft and Ubers? Like, what are you talking about? He goes, oh, yeah. He goes, I make the most amount of money driving from 4 a.m. to 10 a.m. And to me, I was like, there's no way I'd ever do that. I can't imagine doing that. I get it for him. He loved that he was done with his day at 10 a.m. He goes, look, I wake up at 4. Yeah, I'm a bit groggy. Yeah, but or wake up at 3:30 or 3:45, right? I start driving at 4. I get done at 10. I'm done for the day. If I want to go to the beach and sit back and relax and do nothing, I can do that, right? And he loved doing that from 4 a.m. to 10 a.m. And that was the first time I heard about this years ago. So when he interviewed a lot of drivers, it wasn't as a shock to me now, although it was back in the day, that it's interesting that so many different drivers love driving at different points and have their own strategies, like I said earlier when it comes to strategies, but also different perspectives. Some people like the nighttime driving because they're more of a night owl. For me, I'm definitely a night owl. They like driving on Friday and Saturday nights because they're more of a night owl. They prefer driving drunk people, which I personally did, by the way, too. It's a lot more fun. They like the liveliness and the energy of that. Other people like the exact opposite. Be like, nah, morning commutes, it's quiet. I can put on some music, kind of zone out safely, right, and drive people. Other people are like, nah, I like the 4 a.m., like the early morning hours when people are going to the airport. That is the biggest thing I will say. When it comes to drivers who I interviewed who drive around like the 4 or 5 a.m. mark, the number one word I hear is airport. I don't even think I've ever heard someone say, oh yeah, 4 a.m. is good because of something else. It's always airport because in their city or area, airport rides pay bank. Now granted, it does depend area to area. I talked to some drivers, like say in Denver, Colorado as an example, my brother again being one of them, where going to the airport, doing airport rides in Denver was actually the opposite. You make way less money from what I've heard. And in case you know, in Denver, Colorado specifically, or I guess it's probably true for other areas, but the Denver, Colorado airport is a decent drive from the actual heart of the city or Denver proper. I know this is the same case in New Orleans, for example, the MSY airport, the airport in New Orleans is a good distance from the city. However, in other places, it's pretty much right smack dab in there. I feel like LA is a good example of this. Boston, I feel like, is a good example. So it depends on the area, right? In some cases, you might like those airport rides. In some cases, you don't. The one thing I noticed as a unique thread with a lot of the drivers that I interviewed is that they had just different perspectives on when they like to drive, how they want to drive, which makes it pretty awesome that when it comes to Lyft and Uber, when I first started driving, I had the mindset that unless you do a Friday, Saturday night, you can't make anything. And then I realized, oh yeah, morning commutes, evening commutes. Okay, that makes sense. And then the more that I drove, the more I met more and more drivers who were like, oh yeah, actually, forget the morning commutes, forget the evening commutes, forget the Friday and Saturday nights, Saturday and Sunday during the day. And I was like, wait, Saturday and Sunday during the day? And they're like, oh yeah, like 9 a.m. to like 4 p.m. is the best time. And I'm like, what? And then I realized, oh yeah, a lot of people are waking up at their friend's place and Ubering out. Or they're going for a Sunday fun day. Or they're going to brunch. There's a lot of time, there's a lot of money to be made during those times. So I started to learn, like, you know what? For the most part, after interviewing and talking to so many drivers, you can pretty much drive, in a sense, at almost any time and make that money that you want to make. Number 7, premium options. This is one, gotta be honest, that wasn't as common as the thread among all these drivers that I've interviewed, but it was something that I did want to bring up in this video, and that is I've noticed that the drivers who seem most hyped, if I'm going to use that word, about driving Lyft and Uber, who love the pay, who love it, tended to drive for the more premium options. The most common one, probably not surprising, was Lyft or Uber XL. I noticed that was the most common demographic or category or style of driving or vehicle type or whatever of drivers, because if you drive a Lyft and Uber normally, you can only do the regular rides. If you have an XL vehicle, even though you're going now still from point A to point B, you're now maximizing your income a lot. And there are a lot of Uber and Lyft XL rides. In case you don't know, the maximum people you can fit when it comes to driving from Lyft and Uber, a normal vehicle, is 3. One in the, excuse me, 4, sorry. Thinking of during the pandemic. You have the driver, 1 in the front, 3 in the back. So you can have 4 people maximum in that car plus the driver. When it comes to Uber XL, it's usually 5 or more, depending on like the exact size of the vehicle, right? You could have 7 people. Let's say it's a big van with, like, say, 3 in the back, another 3 in kind of the middle section, and then 1 in the front. You could have 7 people, right? And Lyft and Uber XL drivers that I've talked to, I've noticed out of any type of driver, tend to like it the most. And I think the reason why is Uber and Lyft XLs are common enough that you can get tons of rides. Remember, if you drive for Uber and Lyft XL, you can and typically do also drive for regular Uber. So it's not like you're pigeonholing yourself into just XL rides, but also you're making still a really good amount of money when it comes to those XL rides. A lot of the drivers, like I interviewed one in Austin, Texas, who made 6 figures doing Uber XL. He's specifically focused on Uber, right? So a lot of the drivers that I talk to who do XL rides are the ones I've noticed who tend to make the most amount of money within reason and who love it. Now, I will say, I have interviewed other drivers who do, like, say, Lyft Lux or Uber Black or Lyft Lux Black, or all these different ones. I think there becomes almost a negative ROI, and it gets tricky. This also depends upon your area heavily. That at a certain point, if, like, so you do Uber Lux or Lyft Lux, like, so you do the one of the most premium options you can get. Yeah, for one ride to go from point A to point B, you can make the most amount of money out of any order that you can get through Uber and Lyft. But how common is it? Tough to say. That's a bit of an issue. With Uber and Lyft XL, I think it's in that sweet spot that you're making more money per ride, but it's also more common, or relatively common, where you're still getting a good amount of rides, and I think that is a sweet spot. Now, it does depend upon the area. Not surprising at all. The biggest trend I noticed of any demographic when it comes to people driving for, like, say, luxury options who love it, definitely Vegas. I noticed that was one, even more than LA I noticed, to be honest. And I would think LA, celebrities, A-listers, influencers, right? All that kind of stuff. Nah, Vegas was the biggest where when I would talk to drivers, one driver told me, like, yeah, I do way less rides when I do Uber, Lyft, XL. I do way more rides when I do Uber. Let me take a step back. I do way less rides when I do Uber Lux or Lyft Lux or these premium options. But I make so much money doing those rides that it actually offsets, and at the end of the day, I walk away with more money had I done more rides on normal and regular Lyft and Uber, right? So even though they're doing less rides, they're still, at the end of the day, walking away with more money, even if they work the same amount of hours, just because of how much money those rides pay, right? Now, of course, at the end of the day, this does depend upon your location. Vegas is a very unique area, right? So I can see a lot of people saying, F it, we're going to ball out, or a lot of celebrities or influencers. I'm surprised that I didn't hear that as much here in LA, to be honest, but I could see LA, if, let's say, you're in a hotspot area like Hollywood, you plan to drive, and you do Lyft Lux or Uber Lux or these premium options, then you can make a good amount of money. Granted, like I said, it depends upon a lot of different factors. So also that, I think your location for something like this being the biggest, I think, if not the biggest. But it was an interesting thread. This is one that, not saying I didn't think of it or not, but this is one I say that did kind of, this is one that I didn't expect. Although it does make sense, and I wouldn't say that it surprised me, but it's something I didn't expect. Of the biggest common demographic between drivers who make a lot of money and who like it were typically XL drivers. Again, not too surprising when you think about it, but it was something I really didn't expect. Being like, oh, you know what? I guess that makes sense. You're in this huge sweet spot, tons of people ordering XLs all the time with a huge group of people, but also tons of money that you can make doing the same exact ride. And now, a bonus point, and that is most drivers want to be independent contractors. I've done a lot of videos about independent contractors versus employees. I've talked a lot about the Uber and Lyft legality structure and logistics going on right now. It is a gigantic mess. Being honest, I mean, this could change a week from this video, so I want to say that, right? But a huge debate that's going on heavily is, should rideshare drivers say it's independent contractors or employees? After interviewing most drivers, I'd say most, more than most, want to say it's an independent contractor. There are a good amount who do want to be employees, but I've noticed most drivers want to say it's independent contractors. Their main logic for this, it's not going to be surprising at all, they like the flexible schedule. A lot of drivers are worried, after interviewing tons of them, that if they become an employee, they'll lose that flexibility. And I'd say for 90% of drivers, the number one reason why they like driving for Uber and Lyft, why they like ride-sharing, is because of the truly flexible schedule, that they don't have a boss, they don't have to plan ahead even. That's another big kind of underrated thing. That it's not like you say, hey, it's not like you say to Lyft and Uber. Most of us know this. But it's not like you say, hey, Thursday from 1 p.m. to 7 p.m., I'm going to be driving. I'm just letting you know. No, it's not just flexible. It's instantaneously flexible, as I like to call it. We turn the app whenever you want. You turn it off whenever you want, and no warning or heads up to Lyft and Uber. And so for a lot of drivers, they want to say it's independent contractors and not move to the employee side because they're afraid of that potential switch up and losing that big feature that they all know and love. However, that being said, I think every driver pretty much agrees universally. I can't see any driver disagreeing with this. Pretty much unanimous. We need more protection. And by protection, I'm talking about things like health insurance. I'm talking about things like paid sick leave. I'm talking about things like a minimum pay or a minimum hourly guarantee, et cetera, et cetera. Better protection against unlawful if it's illegal, but like unlawful deactivation, like I talked about earlier. Uber is kind of cracking down on that, which is great. And if you look at what happened here in California with Prop 22, in New York, right, what happened when it comes to the wage law and everything that is changing, those changes are huge. And it's kind of like the win-win scenario. You're still an independent contractor, but now you have the protection that employees have, which is the perfect sweet spot. And for me, I would say for a long period of time, I was in favor, for me personally, in case you're curious, of rideshare drivers becoming employees, because I do think there would be a way. To be honest, I think Uber and Lyft could work it out, that you could stay as an employee, but have that flexible schedule. I do think Uber and Lyft could figure it out if they were forced to. But now I've flip-flopped, because I thought, just the way, Uber and Lyft can be pretty bad companies, I'm going to be honest, that drivers would never get protection unless they were employees. I have thought that. I thought unless you're an employee, you're never going to get protected, because Uber and Lyft hates their drivers. They treat them like crap. We all know this. Like I said before, things are getting worse. So, tough to say. Like I said in the beginning point, on one of the beginning points of this video, that most drivers like ride sharing. They don't like Lyft and Uber as companies, right? However, though, if drivers can get protections, the rightful protections they deserve, that means they can get the perfect sweet spot of being an independent contractor, not being an employee. You're fully flexible. You do get the protections as if you're an employee. And now a second bonus point, another one coming at you, and that is delivery driving. I feel like, ironically, now that I think about it, on a lot of my videos, delivery driving tends to be the bonus point. Like if I'm talking about like 5 reasons to blah, 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 I almost always talk about delivery driving, and there's a reason why. It's kind of like the yin yang of the gig economy. I feel like it's ride sharing and delivery driving, right? Because if you look at delivery, I feel like that also includes things like driving for Amazon, if you work for like, maybe not Domino's. I guess Domino's isn't really gig, but like, you got them saying that basically those are the main two, right? Uber Eats and Uber, right? In addition to, in case you didn't know, when you sign up for Uber, it automatically signs you up for Uber Eats. After interviewing tons of drivers, not saying it came up all the time, but it was something that came up or maybe I would ask it, I'd be like, hey, just curious, you love Lyft and Uber, you don't love Lyft and Uber. What about delivery driving? And I got very polarizing responses, depending upon the area and the person. I think if anything, I noticed it was more of a preference than a financial bottom line. So I want to say that some people just like rideshare driving more than delivery driving. Other people I talked to, if it came about, said they like delivery driving more than rideshare driving. I have interviewed delivery drivers as well. I will say for this video, I was mainly focusing on the interviews I did with the rideshare drivers, but I have interviewed a lot of delivery drivers as well. And a lot of them said, yeah, dude, ride sharing, I have to keep my car clean. I have to deal with people. It's kind of annoying to have people in my car. And then I have to talk to them. I'm not a social person. When it comes to delivery driving, a lot of them are like, hey, I throw on a podcast. I can have my friend with me. You can have a passenger and someone with you when doing delivery driving. I can grab the food, take it out. I drive to the person's place. I also make good money. I know a lot of delivery drivers say that depending on the area, you actually might make more money or less. There was a study that was done, or a survey, I did a video about this like it was 3 years ago, I can't remember when, that they went to all these different cities and found out that depending upon the city, depending upon the area, rideshare drivers made more than delivery drivers. In other cases, it was the opposite. They even went more in depth. It's kind of cool to see that they were like, okay, and I'm making this up. In one city, Uber paid the most, then Uber Eats, then Lyft, then DoorDash. In another city, it went like DoorDash, then Lyft, then Uber Eats, then Uber, right? So it organized by the specific one, not just ride sharing versus delivery driving, and that was really interesting to see. So I will say, after interviewing a lot of drivers, I do want to bring this up because it is a very common trend. I feel like that if you're a rideshare driver, it's almost, I don't say impossible, this is a bit dramatic, but I feel like at some point, for almost every rideshare driver, you probably think, what about Uber Eats? Like, if you sign up for Uber and you drive for Uber, you automatically, I can't think of any situation where you don't, but maybe there is, but if you drive for Uber, you automatically, in a sense, qualify for Uber Eats. I'm not gonna lie, for me, I hated delivery driving. No, I like the socialness of Lyft and Uber. I don't like the whole getting out, going into the restaurant, putting my car in the hazards and hoping that I don't get a ticket or whatever, or towed or whatnot. Grabbing the order, making sure I didn't forget that milkshake, because God forbid. Going to the person's place and they're in an apartment complex and they're like, yeah, apartment 14. I'm like, apartment 14? I don't even know which one. And then I'm like, what's your call box number? And I type it in, but I typed it in wrong. Yeah, the logistics of the delivery driving, I hated. Although, I can see why some people really, really like it. Though when it comes to delivery driving, you are, I think, a bit more mobile. Like with Uber Lyft, I pretty much sit the entire time. I do suggest as a pro tip to get out of your car and stretch a little bit. I think I did a video about that when it comes to a pro tip. When it comes to delivery driving, you are getting out more. Some people like that. I think the biggest thing is you don't have to deal with people, and also the barrier to entry is lower. With Lyft and Uber, if you have your own vehicle, it needs to be at least a 4-door vehicle. If you have a 2-door, you can't. However, you can use the 2-door vehicle for Uber Eats, for example. This is just something that I'd say when I noticed when I talked to a lot of drivers that it became just a very polarizing response. That was just interesting. I want to bring it up that I see a lot of times people saying like delivery driving versus rideshare driving, and I have done some videos dedicated just to the aspect of the versus battle. Delivery driving or rideshare driving. But at the end of the day, I thought it would be maybe more money. This is something I will say maybe I didn't expect. That I think for a lot of people, even if delivery driving pays more, they still would prefer rideshare driving. That is a claim I'm willing to make because that's one thing I noticed. When I ask people like, why not Uber Eats? Why not Postmates? Why not DoorDash? They're like, oh no, I like driving for Lyft and Uber. Even for me, if let's say they're like, okay, you can either make, and I guess it depends on the spread. I can either make $25 an hour doing delivery driving or $22 an hour doing rideshare driving. I would choose the $22 an hour. Even though I'm making $3 less an hour, I'd prefer driving for Uber and Lyft more than Uber Eats or DoorDash or Grubhub and Postmates, etc., etc. I guess, although, as a side note, Postmates and Uber Eats, I guess the same thing now, right? But again, I want to say this as a last side point at the end. Last side note is at the end of the day that although you might make more money doing delivery driving, when I talk to a lot of drivers, it seems like among all this kind of stuff that I mentioned, if they're driving for Lyft and Uber, it's because they want to, that they enjoy driving for Uber and Lyft more than delivery driving.